Another day got lost. Scrolling, trying to make sense of this world that I'm in. Is a fake one, no. Wake up feeling like same old.
What's happening, everyone? Welcome to part 3, Mystery Babylon and the Pattern of Empire. So rather than just going straight into who Mystery Babylon is, I think it's important that we look at the pattern of empire and kind of break it down from there and get to Mystery Babylon. So we're going to look at multiple aspects and primarily going to be looking at Edom and the 7 heads, the 10 horns, and how that is all connected and how we end up at Mystery Babylon. So let's go. So first things first, Edom, hostility from the womb. Edom is Esau, and for those who obviously know, Jacob is Israel. This hostility started from the womb, and what that means is there's been a conflict with Jacob and Esau, which begins long before either of them becomes a nation. So Genesis talks about the children struggled within her, and God declares that 2 nations and 2 manner of people are in Rebekah's womb. The earliest hint, right, that this later hostility between Edom and Israel begins before birth. And obviously, from our perspective, we can see that there's been a lot of historical battles or stories between Jacob and Esau, particularly with Esau trying to kill Jacob. Genesis also talks about how Esau hated Jacob and planned to kill him after Isaac's death. This hatred becomes Edom's national character in prophetic literature. So I've read the book of Jasher. It's a highly recommended book if you do get the opportunity to read it. And it talks about multiple attempts where Esau is trying to kill Jacob. And this is all because of the birthright exchange. So the beef is ongoing, ladies and gentlemen. So when we look at Edom's national behavior, this obviously mirrors Esau's personal spirit. Book of Jubilees talks about Esau's sons launching military campaigns against Jacob's line. This sets the stage for long-term hostility. Now, these traditions intensify in the Bible's picture, obviously Edom becoming the rival brother who uses violence to reclaim dominion. When we look at the prophets, they treat Edom's national actions as the continuation of Esau's ancient hostility. Obadiah speaks of Edom stands by while Jerusalem rejoices over Judah's calamity. Psalm 137 talks about Edom cries, raise it to its foundation. Raise it basically means, utterly destroy it, so to speak. Murk it. Amos 1:11 talks about how Edom pursued his brother with the sword, kept his wrath forever. And obviously, Edom possesses a perpetual hatred. So this hatred isn't just a case of, all right, it was a Jacob and Esau beef. It materializes over time. It evolves through nations and empires, of course, because Israel is a nation. So looking at this, we can see that this creates the picture of how there's going to be a later conflict with Edom and Israel. So now let's look at the 7 heads specifically, and we're going to start with the 5 that are fallen. Revelation 17:10 aligns with prophetic imperial sequence in Daniel and the historic record of Israel captivities. So these nations or empires are the ones that had Israel in captivity or took Israel in captivity. So the first one that we had was Egypt, the first captivity. The Exodus story, Moses, Book of Jasher, again, very, very, very good details that are not found in canon. Egypt is the foundational oppressor and the first archetype of bondage. So even when you see Egypt being referenced again further on with the prophets, that Egypt is more of a reference to captivity. Second one is Assyria. This is where the angel struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. But basically, Assyria destroyed Samaria and scattered the northern tribes. 3 is Babylon. So Babylon is also, as much as the 3rd head that's fallen, this is obviously the beginning of the 4 parts of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So we're looking at Babylon first, which is the head of gold. Babylon becomes the prophetic model of imperial pride and judgment. So we obviously know about the Nebuchadnezzar story. We know how Babylon was taken down by the Persians, which was King Cyrus, of course. And Persia came in. Persia rules Israel, but permits a partial return and rebuilding. Then The Grecians with Alexander the Great, a lot of paganism as well. Greece imposes forced Hellenization and defiles the temple. Then moving on, we had Rome. And at the time of John's era, this was the empire that was referenced, or the head that was referenced as the one that is, the sixth head. So this was the ruling empire at the time of John's era, so to speak, when the book of Revelation was. Daniel also references the legs of iron, which represent Rome's unmatched strength. This is also in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. There's references in the Apocrypha as well, but looking specifically at Rome, you can see that Rome had this continuation, especially throughout time, and particularly when you look at the iron. But Rome became the imperial line that opposes Israel and the kingdom of Yahuwah. So, looking at Rome and the links between Edom. Rome fulfills Psalm 137 in 70 CE, destroying the temple. Remember the children of Edom who said, raise it, raise it. Remember when we said it was make it, even to the foundation thereof, right? So that's Psalm 137 verse 7. This references Edom, but it was Rome that did it. So yeah. We also look at the Edom equals Rome from Jewish tradition, because Rome acted exactly as prophesied of Edom. Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, Ezekiel 35:5, and then violence against thy brother Jacob, Obadiah. I'll talk about that other Obadiah link later. Amos condemns nations that traffic in people. Amos is a really good book. I strongly recommend that you read it, especially in the context of the last days. But yeah, they carried away captive the whole captivity to deliver them up to Edom. Amos 1 verse 6, and then buying the poor for silver. So I think we can all reference certain historical events in quite a lot of situations where this would have happened, but this is specifically talking about the children of Israel. So obviously Rome becomes the Edomic, Babylonic superpower of the New Testament era, merging Edom's hostility with Babylon's imperial power. So let's look at this Rome and the Iron Empire. So Rome appears clearly in Daniel's visions as the fourth kingdom in Nebuchadnezzar's statue, the legs of iron, as we've mentioned before. Then that dreadful beast, that fourth beast, with iron teeth. So again, we see that iron is still in there. Obviously, Daniel emphasizes on this because iron symbolizes these two key traits of Rome. The unmatched strength, strong as an iron, obviously it'll break in pieces and crush all. Rome's shattered older civilizations, absorbing, erasing, and reorganizing them. This breaking in pieces also reflects the repeated imperial fragmentation and reconstruction, consistent with later Roman divisions. Pagan Rome, Papal Rome, European empires, and then our current Western world order. So we can see when it says breaking in pieces, this thing is literally morphing and turning into these new empires that we seen in history and then seen today, so to speak. So yeah, moving on. It also talks about the continuity in the last days. When you look at the iron being in the legs and the feet, you can obviously see that this is a continuity into those last days. This means that obviously Rome's system survives into the end times, though it's fractured. Iron mixed with clay signifies successor powers still carrying Rome's political, legal, and cultural DNA. Revelation mirrors this continuity. The beast of the seven heads includes Rome as the one that is, yet its power persists in later heads and obviously the 10 horns. So, the fourth beast iron links, right? Yeah, looking deeper into Rome. The fourth beast iron links the ancient empire to the final one. Daniel's fourth beast is said to devour the whole earth, a scale never reached by Babylon or Persia, but achieved through Rome and its ideological descendants. The beast's iron teeth match the iron legs, showing that they're the same line of empire, extending forward to the 10 horns. So there's some apocryphal links with this. Second Esdras describes a final eagle empire with eagle imagery, the three-headed eagle, and something I'm going to specifically look at in the context of Babylon as well. This eagle empire dominates until God destroys it and restores Israel. And this also mirrors the Iron Kingdom evolving into the end times beast that is judged by the Son of Man. So Daniel's prophecy is not about a single ancient state, but a long-lived system, breaking, dividing, reforming, and ultimately surviving in weakened form until divine intervention crushes the last manifestation of the Iron Empire. So we're going to look at the statue and we're going to look at the timelines, and we're going to kind of look at it logically. Head of gold. This is Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Head of gold. This Babylon empire lasted for 87 years. So if you look at the head, so to speak, when you look at it in comparison to your torso and your legs, so forth, it's small in height relative to later empires. More importantly as well, reflecting its short duration as well. So it's just the head, from head to your shoulders, so to speak. Then you look at the chest and arms of silver, broader than the head, because it's a longer period of time as well, symbolizing a longer period of dominance. Then we look at the belly and thighs of bronze, so 190 years. And then this is medium strength, showing both the reach and the eventual division under Hellenistic successors. And then now we look at the legs of iron. And as you can imagine, the legs of iron are very, very long, because your legs are hopefully longer than other parts of your body. The iron symbolizes strength and endurance, crushing earlier empires. The split legs reflect the Western and the Eastern Roman empires, which eventually fractured yet maintained Roman continuity. The legs of iron and clay represents partially allied, divided powers, precursors to today's Western-led coalitions, the US, NATO, EU, and Eastern alliances, BRICS, Eurasian blocs, still carrying Roman legacy. So, overall, each part of that statue corresponds roughly to the empire's timeline and duration. And then the sequence shows a progression from short-lived Babylon, enduring, fractured dominion, Rome, and its modern heirs, and obviously culminating into the 10 horns that precede the final manifestation of Mystery Babylon. So, we're getting there, aren't we? So, the feet of iron and clay, 10 horns, post-Roman world order. Daniel's feet and the toes show Rome's continuing beyond its fall. So even after it's fallen, the Roman legacy, so to speak, we've got this empire of iron and clay, which is divided and weak nations, so to speak. The kingdom shall be divided, partly strong, partly broken. 10 toes, which are the 10 horns, later reused in Revelation 17, are representing those post-Roman powers that arise from Rome's fragments, but still carry its political DNA. The 10 horns will receive power 1 hour with the beast. Now that's going to happen a little bit later on. This produces a post-Roman world order. So Christianized Europe. At one point, people could only pick between two religions. Was it Christianity or Islam? Anyway, its colonial empires and eventually their offspring states. So when we look at today's Western-led global system, we've got NATO, EU, the US and the UK order, G7. A lot of people thought that the G7 is the 7 heads, but scripture specifically says 5 are fallen. So this is the modern coalition of the iron and clay that we see in the feet, bound together, yet divided in strength. And then obviously these multipolar powers, the rise of BRICS, the Eurasian blocs, the CRINC that I mentioned in the previous, mirror Revelation's pattern of those 10 horns that are going to come up and destroy Mystery Babylon and that West. Now, this geopolitical landscape reflects the final phase of the Roman continuum, preparing the stage for the last iteration of Babylon described in Revelation. So now, before we jump straight back into Babylon, let's have a look at this eighth beast. And this eighth beast is specifically of the 7. What does that mean? Revelation 11 describes a final empire that was and is not and shall ascend. An 8th, yet is still of the 7. Interesting. It rises after the 10 horns have destroyed Mystery Babylon. Cool. So this eighth, which is of the seven, rises after Mystery Babylon is destroyed. Cool. Mystery Babylon itself is the dominant superpower before this collapse. The nation that reigneth over the kings of the earth. Revelation 17, verse 18. This matches a modern world, America sitting at the top of the global political and economic order. The 10 horns ultimately hate the whore and burn her with fire. Revelation 17, symbolizing the coalition of emerging powers who overturn the Western-led world system. So even looking at it from that perspective, it's safe to say that Mystery Babylon will be destroyed by the 10 horns that hate her. But then we also know that in the book of Daniel, we have this little horn that rises up. And it's also said, and we'll dive into this a little bit deeper later, that this little horn takes out 3 of those 10 horns. Now, I find that very fascinating because, if this little horn comes up and takes out 3 of those other horns, like, why? Surely that must be like a vendetta, Anyway, just something worth thinking about. Why would you want to take out those 3 horns? Anyway, only after Babylon's fall does the little horn, the 8th beast, arise, a final empire rooted in the earlier 7. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the post-Roman West, or our structure today. And carrying forward Rome's imperial DNA into last days manifestation. So this 8th empire obviously completes the whole prophetic cycle, revealing that spirit of Babylon controlling the whole world. And this final 8th beast, so to speak, comes in the form of the Antichrist / Apollyon in this kingdom that he'll be operating from, geographically speaking. Anyway, moving on. Jeremiah 15:51, final Babylon, not ancient Babylon. This is something really important and worth touching since we're talking about Babylon or Mystery Babylon. A lot of people disregard Jeremiah 15:51, but let's look at some key things. Jeremiah 15:51 clearly speaks of last days Babylon, not the ancient one. Why? It shall be no more inhabited forever. Ancient Babylon was never burnt or emptied permanently. A nation shall come from the north and make her land desolate. Their arrows shall be of a mighty expert man. That language often linked to long-range, devastating end-time weapons, And ancient Babylon fell peacefully to Persia, if we all remember the writing on the wall, fulfilling Isaiah 45:1, Cyrus as Yahweh's anointed. This wasn't destroyed by fire. This wasn't emptied forever. This wasn't hated by a coalition or an assembly of nations. And then Revelation repeats Jeremiah's same imagery. In 1 hour thy judgment has come. Babylon shall be thrown down and shall be found no more at all. Second Esdras also puts some meat to the bones and says, a great tumult, nations rising up to fight one against each other, right? 15 specifically talks about this war that starts. And it looks like it starts in an area where there's, the land of the Assyrians, Carmanians, which sounds like Persia / Middle East, so to speak. And then more importantly, after some madness goes on, these armies move on to Babylon. Anyway, and a whole bunch of places get destroyed, like it says, Anyway, let me just carry on. So woe to thee, Babylon and Asia, for the sword is sent upon you. This matches the sudden and fiery destruction of the end-time Babylon. Together with Jeremiah 50:51, Revelation 17:18, 2 Esdras 15 form a unified prophetic picture, a future superpower, wealthy, global, arrogant, and violent Mystery Babylon overthrown violently in the final days by rival nations. So, Mystery Babylon, the one that is yet to come. So the one that is yet to come is this kingdom that we're currently living in. Mystery Babylon, we know that she sits over this kingdom. So we know that the one is, we've got the Rome, John's era. The one that is yet to come is obviously this later global system arising from Rome's legacy. This post-Roman world order matches Revelation 17:18 description of Babylon. She reigns over the kings of the earth. So this nation here literally runs policy, so to speak, over the world. Merchants are the great men of the earth. So basically people from her are the richest people, all the billionaires. You got them coming out of Babylon or Mystery Babylon. And by her sorceries, all the nations were deceived. I'm going to touch on sorceries and what that means in the Greek, etc. Global trade networks, luxury, militarism, and cultural influence. We all know, growing up, I don't know about you, but we was all watching American TV shows. We was doing American accents. America was the thing. Even today, I still struggle, to watch. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I used to struggle to watch films from other countries, even the UK. But yeah, it's a little bit different now. But the reality is that's how influential Babylon was, from my perspective anyway. So we can also look at something very, very important here, which is transatlantic slave trade that fulfills that Deuteronomic pattern. The Lord shall bring thee into Egypt. Remember, we talked about Egypt being captivity. And that key word again with ships. This is a prophecy given to Moses saying, you're going to go back to Egypt again on ships. So again, this also aligns with Amos's condemnation of trafficking nations, Amos chapter 1, verse 6 and 8:6. So today's multipolar shift, BRICS, Eurasian alliances, and global powers that are emerging echoes the 10 horns that are turning against the whore, preparing the eventual fall of Mystery Babylon. Among all nations, obviously, America exhibits the strongest characteristics of Mystery Babylon. We have the centralized economic power and global currency influence. We've got the military dominance and bases worldwide. You've got the cultural hegemony through media and technology. You've got wealth, you've got luxury, you've got political reach, aligning with the prophetic descriptions of Babylon. There's just so many things that point to America as Mystery Babylon. It's very, very difficult to say it's Rome. I know a lot of people say it's Israel as well. They definitely are part of that Babylonic system. But the reality is it's America that we're talking about here. So again, economic dominion and moral inversion. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries all nations were deceived. So imagine that word sorceries is called pharmakia. Now, I know a lot of people thinking pharmacy, yeah, but not only does it sort of have that as the root word for that word, so to speak, but it symbolizes economic and ideological seductions, consumption, debt, technology, and more importantly, media influence. There's a lot of stuff that's come out of America, whether it be good or bad. There's a lot of media influence that comes from America. One can view America as the economic priesthood of the global order. And to be honest with you, that's a very, very good way of putting it, because America is kind of like the baseline for all nations that are trying to look prosperous. Or they basically are the blueprint. They print their own world's reserve currency, which must be nice. If I could, I would. Exporting culture and maintaining vast military bases abroad. Archaeologically and historically, every empire from Babylon to Rome, Britain to now the US, followed a cycle of expansion, opulence, and overreach, leaving monumental ruins as witness. So we are not going into the history of what these nations have done, but we know. The 10 horns and the multipolar challenge. I really do find the Russian media, so to speak, even Putin, I find them very fascinating, because even when you look throughout history, especially after sort of the 2001, you can see that Russia has been involved in so many coalitions that have just popped up, Eurasian this, that, and Russia's just in all of them. You know what I mean? So yeah, anyway, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore and shall make her desolate. Long story short, they're going to destroy her. Now, it's always been very difficult for us to look at the destruction of this Babylon, but when you kind of consider nuclear weapons, I think it's very, very possible to destroy a whole country, considering, what we've heard about the stories about Hiroshima and all of that stuff, whether it be true or not. The bottom line is these weapons can destroy. The 10 horns present allied powers once subordinate to Babylon that later turn against her. So, emerging coalitions of nations challenging Western hegemony, what analysts call today a multipolar world. So, multipolar world is basically these nations trying to form their own currencies, trying to form their own, sort of global policy that is favorable to them. So, looking at the economic alliances such as BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then later expanded, echo the 10 horns, so to speak, or the 10 kingdoms that received power 1 hour with the beast. Their arrows in Jeremiah 59 corresponds metaphorically to advanced weaponry or global sanctions that hasten Babylon's collapse. So Ethiopia as well was part of this BRICS alliance, and they kind of make it the 11th nation, which I find very fascinating. So Ethiopia is a key player, but we'll look at that in more depth later. Once again, destruction of Babylon from the north, the prophetic direction of Babylon judgment. So, for out of the north cometh a nation against her that shall make her land desolate. Now, if you want to look at maps, and specifically if you want to look at sort of north of America, you find yourself somewhere in Russia. And if you want to look at, global maps, or if you even want to look at flat earth maps, America is specifically north of Russia. So, as I was mentioning, Russia is kind of like, central of all this. It says it's an assembly of nations, right? An assembly of nations. And we already know, so it doesn't mean that all of these nations are from the north, but geographically speaking, if you look at certain maps, like I've said, a lot of this is to the US's north. So again, it makes sense, right? But anyway, for out of the north, obviously, there come up a nation against her that shall make her land desolate. He hath furbished his arrows, he that made it ready. Now, let's just specifically talk about these arrows once again. These ain't bow and arrows, bro. Like, how can you make a land desolate with bow and arrows? You're just going to fill it with wood, all right? These are not arrows. If you're a prophet, again, thousands and thousands of years ago, and you're seeing a giant rocket and you ain't got no other word to describe it because you don't know what a rocket or a missile is, you're going to call it an arrow. See what I'm saying? So, yeah. So this assembly of nations represents military and economic opposition arising from regions once peripheral to Western dominance, Eurasia, the global South, and the re-empowered West. The arrows of a mighty man in an apocalyptic reading become the swift technologies of destruction, missiles, nuclear weapons that overturn empires in 1 hour. Starting to make sense, right? Why is the judgment so quick if it's not these destructive weapons? Second Esdras, which we're going to look at in more detail because there is so much in Second Esdras. Again, strongly recommend that you read that one. And they shall go steadfast unto Babylon and make her afraid. They shall come to her and besiege her. The star, oh my goodness. This star thing pops up so many times in Second Esdras. And again, let's just go back to the prophet. I'm looking at this, obviously, you're probably looking above the firmament and you're looking down and you can see, what can you see? Destruction, of course, right? But you can see this, why is he saying a star, right? Yeah, the star and all wrath, they shall pour upon her. They're pouring stars upon her. What is that? It sounds a lot like there's some stars going off in the form of nuclear weapons. Anyway, the star and all wrath they shall pour out upon her. Then the dust. This is again very, very interesting. We've all seen those pictures, those films of what happens when a nuclear blast goes off. You got the puff cloud, or what you want to call it, right? But this specifically says the dust and smoke shall come up unto the heaven. Come on, man. The star and dust, right? And all that they be about us shall bewail her. We've seen that imagery in the book of Revelation. And they that remain under her shall do service unto her. Now, again, these people aren't just going to be, destroying Babylon and making it desolate. They're going to have armies and stuff like that. They're going to be taking people captive. Whew. Anyway, moving on. Wars and rumors of war. So where are we at right now? So obviously we'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. Don't be troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So this is where we are right now. These things must come to pass, all these wars and rumors of wars. But we're at the stage where I believe, anyway, that this whole peace and safety stuff is where we're at in terms of there's a whole peace treaty going on right now somewhere in the world, and probably more peace treaties to come. But at some point, all of that's going to flip. But yeah, at this moment in time, we're hearing wars, we're hearing rumors of wars, of course. I don't think that's going to stop. So rumors can also refer to the media, whose constant reporting amplifies the awareness of conflicts and economic crises. Again, prophets from thousands of years ago. How are you going to describe, the media, so to speak? But rumors makes perfect sense. These rumors are not direct fulfillments, but also cyclical birth pangs of the world system transition. Every Babylon meets its Medes, every empire its set of horns. Even the scripture says that, he's going to raise up the spirit of the Medes to come and destroy Babylon. So again, very, very interesting. In the modern context, America as Babylon both engages in conflict and mediates peace. Peace deal here, we'll throw some bombs over there. Projecting military power in war zones while simultaneously shaping global peace, agreements, alliances, and sanctions. Now, come on, guys, is this not the US? And is this not like the characteristics of what you would call Mystery Babylon? Do you know what I mean? Like, just if it walks like a duck. Anyway, so this dual role reflects Babylon's prophetic function: dominance, influence, and control over the fate of nations, even as rival powers challenge and eventually dismantle its supremacy. 10 horns. So, amidst all this madness, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to get people to escape and flee right now, but the reality is you have to read what the scripture says. So, more importantly, I believe that there's going to be a time where, it's going to be fairly obvious when it's time to go. But the scripture does say, "Come out of her, my people, that ye not be partakers of her sins, and that ye not receive her plagues." The prophets foresaw a time when Israelites would be called to flee Mystery Babylon, the final empire of pride, oppression, and economic control. Now, Mystery Babylon isn't just the only place that's going to be destroyed, so to speak, or that's going to undergo, the nuclear war, so to speak. It's going to be happening everywhere. Remember, they set off one nuke, it goes off everywhere. And especially if you're in the West, man, you're messed up, because it's going to be a madness. Now, if you think psychologically, that's going to be messed up for a lot of people, especially if you're one of these people that are tied to the sort of lifestyle of the West, It's going to be very difficult to leave, or you're going to think that, it's going to be safer to be in those nations. But realistically, I'd rather be in a nation that doesn't even know what nukes are. You know what I mean? And when I showed you that chart, I think in the previous episode, I can show you again. Africa, a lot of these countries, they do not have nukes. They do not engage. So yeah. Anyway, so this exodus is both spiritual and physical, echoing the exodus from Egypt and prophetic warnings about Edom, Rome, and Babylon. The faithful are gathered from the four corners of the earth into the wilderness, a place of protection, and returning to Zion in Ethiopia. Yes, and again, we'll explain this. This reflects the preservation of God's people described in Jeremiah 50 and 51, 2 Ezra 15, 46 to 50. Safe from Babylon's destruction. So there's definitely a place where you'll be safe from Babylon's destruction and all the other destructions that are going on. As Mystery Babylon falls through the 10 horns and the nations rise against her, the Israelites are gathered into the wilderness, awaiting their return to Zion and the establishment of God's order. And the nations shall walk in thy light, and kings in the brightness of thy rising. I think at some point, people are going to start to realize who the Israelites are. Not just from, the perspective of, oh yeah, because that's what we want or whatever. No, it's more about what scripture says. And I'm going to show you that, because I think there's also like an awakening of the whole world where people go, oh, okay. Because like I've tried to allude to before, I don't necessarily think that we've been told the truth about the Israelites. Anyway, so looking at the Most High's instructions. Now, we're not going to read all of these word for word, but you can kind of get the picture. You got Isaiah chapter 48, verse 20, which speaks about fleeing from Babylon, fleeing out of the land of the north, from the land of the Chaldeans, and from the coasts of the earth. That's a lot of places to flee from. That basically sounds like four corners to me. Depart ye, go ye out from thence. Touch no unclean thing. This is Isaiah 52, 11, again, you got Jeremiah 50, verse 8. You got Jeremiah 51, verse 6. Flee out of the midst of Babylon and everyone save his life. And that's very specific. You got Zechariah 2, verse 6 to 7, and it obviously talks about fleeing from the land of the north. We've also got this extended section here. It's a prophecy from Ezekiel, chapter 17, verse 20 to 23. And I'm not going to read the whole verse for you, but it's basically written almost like a parable, basically. Talks about the Most High planting a tree in the mountains. That's kind of like an oversimplification for it. But long story short, it gives you an idea that he will take his people out from Babylon and take them into, this place of refuge, so to speak, which is basically in Jerusalem, in some high mountains. So the summary of this scripture, and like I said, give it a good read, but you want to check out the summary. The summary is obviously Babylon represents the oppression, the exile, the moral corruption. Yah promises to take a remnant of his people, the tender twig, and plant them in safety. This planting is both literal and symbolic. More importantly, a restoration of Israel, protected from world empires, and the preparation for the eventual return to Zion. So again, really make sense. The highlands of Ethiopia, and we're not going to go through all of this, but it specifically talks about mountains. There's so many mountains. Anyway, it parallels the end times pattern, fleeing from mystery Babylon, being gathered from the four corners of the earth, and then awaiting the establishment of God's kingdom. This basically means God regathers the exiled and scattered people to their own land. So, as much as this like flee, the Most High is behind it all, but you really do need to follow instructions when the time comes. So this is the conclusion and the cycle of empires. Scripture consistently reveals the cycle of bondage, pride, and divine deliverance from Exodus to the fall of Babylon. This cycle begins with Edom, whose hatred for Jacob set the pattern for the empires oppressing Israel. We look to Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And the transatlantic slave trade fulfilling the Deuteronomic warning, the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. And we haven't really dived into too much about that, but I think it makes perfect sense that this is another part or more recent history, of course. In the modern context, Mystery Babylon, wealthy, militarily powerful, and globally dominant, find its closest parallel in America. BRICS and all those other nations, they basically fit the 10 horns, opposing Babylon and, more importantly, executing divine judgment. All depict the final stages of history, showing empires rising and falling, 10 horns enduring until the Messiah destroys them. So, from Edom, the primordial hostility to Rome, and finally to Babylon, or Mystery Babylon, Scripture demonstrates that every empire is built on oppression, pride, and human strength is temporary. Yahushua's kingdom stands alone forever, bringing ultimate deliverance for Israel and all nations. So, I hope I've made that point of who Mystery Babylon is, and also looking at the nations from that perspective, a much deeper perspective, rather than just saying it's this country. There's lots of videos online that you can find that, go through more modern links about who Mystery Babylon is, and even links to how, America looks like Rome and all of that stuff. So again, study to show thyself approved, but I'm really hoping that this was quite eye-opening from another perspective and still making the point on who Mystery Babylon is. Thank you very much for joining me. And up next, we'll be looking at the three-headed eagle and how this all makes sense to all these empires that we've been talking about. So thank you very much, and I'll catch up with you soon.